to look at Higher Human Biology, Unit 3, Key Area 5, Non-Specific Body Defences. The key learning outcomes that hopefully we will be able to achieve by the end of this video are to explain how the epithelial cells form a physical barrier, to explain how chemical secretions are used to fight invading pathogens. So those two are grouped together in the initial defences. We're then going to look at defining a pathogen very quickly. We're going to describe the role of histamine in the inflammatory response, and then look at a process called phagocytosis and how phagocytes destroy pathogens. We're finally going to talk about how phagocytes release cytokines and what the function of this is also. So the first thing we look at is physical and chemical defences. Our immune systems evolved to protect us from pathogens such as bacteria, viruses, or any other organism that can cause disease. Within an immune system, the non-specific body defences are those which repel or destroy pathogens without, funnily enough, specificity. They'll destroy any pathogen, especially bacteria though. They're used as a general method for dealing with these pathogens, the invaders. The non-specific defences are split into those which prevent the pathogens entering the body and those which destroy them once they're inside. So we start with looking at the ones that prevent entry to the body. In biology, we tend to think of the outside of the body as the area outside the skin, which is fairly obvious. So anything on the outside of your skin we count as the outside of the body. But due to something, due to the fact that we're something called deuterostomes, we would also technically consider the inside of your digestive tract as the outside of your body, and even the inside of your respiratory system, because pathogens can come from the outside world into these areas without needing to pass through what we call the epidermal layer. So the first stage of defences in non-specific would be our physical defences. This is a layer of closely packed together epithelial cells, which is these epithelial cells, and they run along the outside of your skin. So your skin cells are epithelial, the inner lining of your digestive system, and the lining of your respiratory system. So it's these closely packed epithelial cells which act as the physical barrier. Still really on the outside of your body are our chemical defences. So these are made up of things like the tears, which contain enzymes called lysozymes, your saliva, which contains enzymes, your mucus, which traps pathogens, and then using small hairs called cilia, that mucus is wafted out, either out of the body through your snot sneezing or into the stomach. And the stomach acid itself is a form of chemical defense. It's a very low pH, acidic environment, and it's good for destroying a lot of invading pathogens. So we have the tears, saliva, the mucus, and the stomach acid being what the chemical secretions are made up of. And we find these in, obviously, the eyes, the mouth, all through the digestive tract. The reproductive tract has a lot of mucus in it, and in the respiratory system as well. Again, just pathogens are anything that can cause disease or infection. So we have things that are parasites, protozoa, such as malaria, which is a Plasmodium falciparum. We have fungi, we have bacteria, but we also have things like viruses and prions, which are a slightly different form of life. So the next subsection we look at is the inflammatory response. When a pathogen is detected within the body, so that's when it has breached this initial kind of skin, respiratory, gastrointestinal level, we have an inflammatory response that our body sets up. If you cut yourself, you might find the area swells with fluid and it gets quite red and sore and hot. This is the inflammatory response. It's something that your body does deliberately to direct more blood flow to the area where there could be a potential infection. You could cut yourself in space or in an area which has no pathogens, and your body will still automatically drive the inflammatory response just in case. It's a very kind of simple, easy to put through process. The first thing is we have cells in our body called mast cells, like the mast of a ship. Now, these mast cells store a lot of histamine, which is a chemical compound, and when the body tells it that you've damaged your skin or there's some kind of pathogen, it will release these histamine molecules into the surrounding fluid. So these mast cells will release histamine in the first stage of the inflammatory response. What this does is it causes something called vasodilation. So it causes the walls of the capillary. So you can see these are the cells of the capillary. There's the cells on the outside wall of the capillary. We know from National 5 that the capillary is one cell thick. So you can see that cell here. You can see the small kind of joining gaps here. This is where the fluids and things can leak out. And we can also see, so we've got our histamine molecule from the previous slide. We have bacterial pathogens here with the skin layer, and we can see we've cut ourselves in this example. So we've cut ourselves, bacteria have come in, the body has noticed this, and the mast cells have produced histamine. We have the wall of the capillary here. We have what are called phagocytes, which we'll talk about in the next slide. These are a type of white blood cell, which are important in our non-specific immune system. We also have these little things here, which are clotting elements or clotting factors, which again on the next slide we'll look at their function. So if the bacteria coming in through the hole in our skin, our epithelial layer, we have the histamine being produced. And what happens is the histamine causes vasodilation. So it causes the blood vessels to get wider, which encourages more blood flow to the area. Because more blood is flowing to the area and all of these phagocytes and clotting elements are contained within the blood, it means more phagocytes and clotting elements will go to that area. The accumulation of phagocytes allows a process called phagocytosis, which we'll talk about in a second, to happen. So the bacteria get engulfed and destroyed, and it allows these clotting elements to come out through the gaps in the capillary wall. So the capillary gets a little bit more leaky. It allows these phagocytes to come into the kind of area around and engulf the bacteria, and it allows the clotting elements to clot over this hole. So what that does is the bacteria that they've already got in will be dealt with by phagocytes, but what the clotting elements do is they stop more bacteria or other pathogens getting in. So we've encouraged through the histamine's production, the vasodilation, and the leakiness, the permeability of the capillary wall. This allowed phagocytosis and the clotting of this part of the wall. So we've been talking about phagocytosis, but we don't quite know what that is yet. It's actually quite a simple process. Phagocytosis, phagos comes from the Greek of to eat. There's also pinocytosis, which is to drink, which is a slightly different process. So phagocytosis is just the membrane of the phagocyte initially recognizes the pathogen. So it looks at this and it says, hey, you're not one of my body cells. I don't like you. I don't know you. So the phagocyte recognizes that the pathogen is not from the body. What it does next is it pushes against the pathogen and it folds its outer layer, its plasma membrane, around the pathogen. It'll then, once it gets all the way around, it will bud off and it will kind of bring that pathogen into the body in what's called into the cell in what's called a vesicle. So we're now inside the cytoplasm of the phagocyte. Here, a cell part called the lysosome approaches. It contains a digestive enzyme, which the lysosome fuses with the vesicle that's been formed, and the digestive enzymes flow into this space here. Now, the digestive enzymes will break down this pathogen and completely destroy it. So all the proteins that make up this pathogen will be completely destroyed and broken down. So through this quite simple process, the phagocyte recognizes that the pathogen is not of the body. It pushes against it, and in a process called phagocytosis, it engulfs it. The lysosome, which we can see here, fuses against the vesicle that is formed, and the enzymes within it will break down that pathogen. So it's quite a simple and easy to do process. All the phagocyte needs to do is recognize that this cell is not of the body. It doesn't need to know what it is, completely non-specific. It engulfs it through phagocytosis and digests it. Another thing the phagocyte does, which is very, very good, is it releases something called cytokines. Now, cytokines are just little proteins that will encourage more white blood cells of specific types to come to that area. So the phagocytes, often near the end of their lifetime, will engulf as many different pathogens as they can, and then will release these cytokines to encourage more phagocytes and more other white blood cells to come to that site. That's when we quite often move from the non-specific to the specific immune system. Hopefully that's made some kind of sense. We understand the epithelial cells are the physical barrier, and that they're found in the skin, respiratory, and the digestive systems. We know chemical secretions are used to fight pathogens, and these are found in our tears, our mucus, they're found in our stomach acid and our saliva. We know that pathogens are just anything, a bacteria, a fungi, a virus, a prion, that can cause a disease or infection. We know that histamines and their role in the inflammatory response, so they're released by the mast cells, and they encourage vasodilation, increase permeability of the capillaries, and the clotting elements to go to the site. We know that phagocytosis is the engulfing of pathogens, so you recognise it's not of the body, engulf it through phagocytosis, digest it with a lysosome using their digestive enzymes. You will then release cytokines, which encourage more phagocytes and other white blood cells to come to that area. So that is an overview of the non-specific responses, and we'll move on next time to look at specific. If anything that doesn't make sense, please do get in contact with your teacher.